Hello and welcome to the show here on our game. Myself, Shane Stapleton, joined as ever by Michael Verney. We're here to unpack what has been a quiet enough old weekend in the GA front. We're going to get to it in a second. Reminder, we're brought to you by Orgaretta.com. Use the promo code OurGame and you get 15% off any of these brilliant jerseys you see on screen. Maybe you have a little fancy for this Wexford effort, maybe that Galway one. There's loads of them there, so get to Orgaretta.com and use the promo code OurGame. Michael Verney, where do we start with the weekend? Should we talk about the penalty shootout? Should we talk about, another Cork collapse? Or should we talk about the thing that's on everyone's lips, this old thing here?
Yeah, geez, I wasn't watching that game live, Shane. I was covering another game. I was covering the Meath football game. And then you see the video of it, and I couldn't believe it when I saw it, to be honest with you. Yeah, I saw it in slow-mo, and then you're kind of thinking, sure, anything can look, weird or whatever in a slow-mo. And then I saw it, in normal time, and it was just like, I couldn't believe it. To me, like, my mind was totally blown by it. I think there's so much even to unpack in it, and like a lot of it is speculation. There's no point in saying any different, but there's so much to speculate about it as well. But like not a word spoken between the two. It almost looked like, I don't know if you ever saw, this is an obscure reference, but
on you go.
the Rock challenged Hulk Hogan to a match at WrestleMania in 2002, and they shake hands, and one of them goes to walk away, and the other lad is still holding the hand, just pulls him kind of back in. And that was almost like what happened yesterday. And you can see kind of a somewhat bewildered look from Shefflin back at Cody. And Cody's kind of like, it's kind of like that, like he's spitting fire a small bit. Now, there has to be a load of context to it. Kilkenny had just lost a game that they potentially could have won, or at least gotten a draw of. I think Shefflin met Cody, either was he en route to Column Lines or on the way back from Column Lines, when he probably had a word with him, maybe over the free. So there was an awful lot of tension involved. But like, to me, it was like the moment of the weekend, and it's all anybody is talking about, really.
Look, I mean, we're not going to make too much out of this, but it was. Talk about a moment. And look, some people would say no matter which manager he came up against, it was going to be like that. But if I put this up on screen, that's when Eddie Brennan came up against Brian Cody a couple of years ago. And, Kilkenny are always going to be beaten Laois, so maybe it was a little bit easier, victory and all that kind of stuff. It was because of the defeat. It really stung. And, I threw it up on Twitter afterwards in terms of, caption this, as I've put up on screen here, caption this, and the amount of responses was huge. I'll just go through one or two of them here. I mean, you have to give people plaudits for the creativity. Alan Tobin, you can put that away now, that hand away now, you little pup. I taught you well, says Eileen Troy. Could be worse, Brian. You could be Cork or Tip. I'll scroll down a couple of them with a bit of tasty language here and there. A2 Henry, particularly good one there from Porrick Gill. Let's see. I'm just not angry. I'm disappointed, and so on and so forth. There's so much response. Have we seen anything like this get as much of a response in quite some time in GA?
Not in the GA. Everyone's pointing back to the 2001 handshake between Roy Keane and Mick McCarthy, and almost like I suppose that handshake, I don't know how significant that was at the time, but when the fallout came and Saipan came, like, that was the only thing that was been talked about. That and the picture, that great picture of McCarthy and Keane walking in opposite directions on the training ground. There is a lot of context to this. And to be honest, we don't know a lot of the context, but there's more going on in this than probably we realise. But just some of the bits that we do realise. We'd Nicky Brennan on last Monday, Shane, and he said, and it might have flown under the radar a small bit, where he said that Henry had the opportunity to work with Cody, but he decided that he was going another way. And I kind of known that from a few months back, that Cody had, asked Shefflin a couple of times, is my understanding, to get involved with Kilkenny, and he had turned him down. And I think it's probably one thing to turn him down, but from Cody's point of view, I would imagine to turn him down at different stages and then go out west and be coming up against Cody and be coming up against Kilkenny. There's a potential that was, part to it. I do think that was a fascinating twist to it. That potentially, two guys that combined to win 10 All-Irelands together, that there could be a little beef between them because of this. Now, I totally understand Henry's point of view of maybe not wanting to go and work under Cody. Not necessarily go work under Cody, go work under anybody in Kilkenny. He wants
He's his own man.
Yeah, he's his own man. He wants to be the Kilkenny manager. He probably... I've had a couple of different players, ex-players who want to be senior county manager in their own county say to me, when I go in, or if I get the chance to go in, I will be going in gung-ho as manager. I won't be going in as coach. I won't be going in as selector. When they hear my voice, I want them to hear it as the manager, authoritative. I don't want them to have any preconceived notions. I've had a few people say that to me, and I'd imagine Henry is something similar. He is his own man. He was his own man as a player. He's his own man as a manager now. He wanted to do his own thing. But from Cody's point of view, then, you potentially look at it as, a slight. And why won't he work with us? Why is he going somewhere else? And you don't know how those conversations exactly went down, but it was so fascinating. There was so much to unpack in it. Imagine to say that there was no word said. It was just a handshake. There was no arm around the back, and there's just so much speculation to arise from it. And I do think, like, some people would say, "Oh, hold on now, lads, you're going a bit far over a handshake." Like, it was absolutely fascinating, and I think it's okay to speculate with facts that we have out there, but it's okay to speculate about what might have happened. And Cody looks like he's spitting fire there. Henry looks bewildered and a bit confused. But it's like us getting interviewed, Shane, in the couple of minutes after a game. Emotions are so on high, and emotions were clearly on high there. And listen, they're barring, a couple of big shocks, they're going to meet again. And now all of a sudden, they don't want it to be about them, but it will, if they meet again, it's never been more about them.
It can't be denied. Never has so little been said and yet so much said, just in terms of a handshake. Are we overdoing it? We might be a small bit here at this stage. But you know what? I think a lot of people aren't particularly pleased with Brian Cody after it. And I mean the general viewer, or maybe even people within Kilkenny, maybe Galway, that, it was just a little bit needless and unnecessary. And, maybe there's no need to bring in the fact that, Henry's obviously been through a tough time at home, with losing his brother, which is obviously horrendous. But people are throwing that in and saying, there's no need, Brian. It's only a game of hurling. So there is that element of it. So I do feel that certain people might actually not. There might be a bit of schadenfreude towards Kilkenny this year. I'm actually wondering, is it possible that Brian Cody has made Kilkenny even less popular than Tipperary this morning?
I don't think he'd have to do a lot now, Shane. He'd have to do a lot to trump that one, I'd say, to be honest with you. Just as regards, I'm sure Brian Cody offered his deepest sympathies to Henry at the time, and I think, I suppose maybe time moves on, and this was just the heat of battle after a game, and I just think, as I said, the seconds after, if they shook hands maybe 15 or 20 minutes after the game, it would probably be completely different, I'd say. But thankfully, I think we got that, and it's like, when round two happens, as it invariably will, that picture is going to be everywhere. It's going to be in the front of newspapers. It's going to be for any video promos that are done. It's not about them, but it is about them. And I think, Shefflin passed his first major audition, for, becoming probably the next Kilkenny manager. He's faced Brian Cody. He's 1-0 against Cody in Championship hurling in a huge game. And some people saying yesterday that Cork and Clare was a bigger game. I don't think you can say what was a bigger game. That potentially has massive ramifications. Kilkenny don't win, one of their next 2 games, they could be potentially out of Leinster. So I think that was a huge game yesterday and a huge win for Shefflin. I'd love to know, Ronnie O'Sullivan is wearing a mic throughout this World Snooker Championship for a Netflix documentary. Wouldn't you love to have Shefflin wearing a mic, for a potential documentary that's coming out at the end of the year, or behind the scenes footage? What would you give for behind the scenes footage of what was going on in the dressing rooms before and after? What Cody said to the Kilkenny lads after. Like, I wonder, was Henry's name mentioned in the build up to the game? Or was he just potentially referred to as him? Or would he say anything about him because he's got relations playing for his own Kilkenny team, and TJ and the boys have played with Henry for so long? I just think it's fascinating.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned documentaries. I'd heard some talk back around 2014 that there was talk that Henry was going to do a documentary on his final season playing with Kilkenny, but that, you can imagine how that would go down with Brian Cody. But look, I'm not entirely sure if that's true, but that's certainly some of the talk that did the rounds. Not that we'd go on rumour and hearsay or any of that crack around here. We're far too professional for that. But it has that Belichick-Brady vibe for anyone who's into NFL. And, Henry obviously took, you can imagine composing yourself after what happened there. He took a while to come out to the press media afterwards. Cody wasn't asked about it, but what he did say is, I have no idea what's tense about anything to do with anybody or anybody else. But whenever we play a match, as long as I'm involved in it, it's got absolutely nothing to do with who's in charge of any team. So can I just ask you your thoughts on the game itself? For a finish, Galway won by 124 to 317. And to me, as I watched the game back last night, I was thinking, there's a certain familiarity to Galway here from their first game against Wexford. They're in a commanding position, and now late on they've let the opposition back into it. They really should have beaten Wexford the first day out, and you thought if they get knocked out, that'll be the reason why. Obviously there was was it a fortuitous free? The more I watch it back, and I watched it back 3 or 4 times, I do think it was a free. There was shades of 2014 and Brian Hogan versus Paddy Maher, and obviously Bubbles had the Hawkeye free after it. There were shades of that. Can I just
say something on that, Shane? I was just thinking about that last night. The referee has to make a call, right? The kind of, general, it's a kind of a robust challenge. He has to make a call. And you're just thinking about even that Brian Hogan one. A call had to be made. It was either going to be charging or over carrying. This might sound a bit silly, but when a referee is like, you don't really know, but some sort of decision has to be made. Like, this might sound silly, but is a throw ball in that scenario? He doesn't really know, but something has happened. But if you're not 100% sure, do you just throw the ball in? Do you blow the whistle potentially and throw the ball in that scenario, rather than, it's a free for one team or it's a free for another? If you're not sure in that moment in time, and I'm just thinking even with the Brian Hogan one as well at the end of 2014, you can't be for sure that that's a free for charging. You can't be for certain that it's a free the other way either for a robust tackle. Do you know what I mean? Whereas blowing a whistle and giving a free, that's game over one side or the other, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, but if the free wasn't blown, Kilkenny had a shot to win the game from open play. The ball was breaking towards Tom Phelan, I think. And, Paddy Deegan was on the front foot after knocking it down. A couple of things in that. When I watched it in the slow-mo, and this tells you how difficult it is to truly say, obviously you're a massive Kilkenny supporter, so you're going to say it was no free. But you could see that Tom Monaghan, as soon as, first of all, Paddy Deegan got the ball. No question about that. But I think that was with the right side of his body leaning across with the hurley. He got the ball. I think some part of the left side of his body knocked Tom Monaghan over the head, because you can see Tom Monaghan's body is leaning backwards, and then all of a sudden his entire body is leaning forwards. And he also hit him on the head. I mean, that doesn't seem to be up for debate. So I don't see how it mightn't be a free in that case if you do what I would consider somewhat dangerous play. I mean, most frees in hurling are for some form of dangerous play or others. So I'm not saying he tried to do him or anything like that, but he did hit the man on the head in the action of going for the ball. So that to me is a free. And then the other thing is, Paddy Deegan didn't really complain too much. So that to me suggests a little bit of guilt.
Yeah, the idea of man ball and all might have been fine 15 or 20 years ago. But let's call it a spade a spade. Realistically, it's not now. It's anything up around the head is generally blown as a free now. And you can say, I got the ball. There are many times in a game you get the ball, but you also potentially, take the man with you.
You love taking the man with you.
Yeah.
But you can't do it on the head.
No, you can't do it around there. And funny enough, Shane, you said about watching it again. like initially I thought Paddy Deegan's hurl was the hurl that went flying. And you're thinking, oh, bang, free, sure, you know, hurl's gone out of his hand, the hurl flies across the ground. Then you look back at it again and realise it's Tom Monaghan's, but it was from the force of the Paddy Deegan tackle. I have a bit of sympathy with the defender, but it's a very, very robust tackle. There's no point in saying any different. And he made probably Colm Lyons make a decision. It's probably like a 75-25 call, I'd say, in favour of Galway. But generally in the modern game, you know, the offensive player, the player that's in around the ball will get the benefit of the doubt. Wouldn't, like 10 or 15 years ago, no doubt, game would have played on, absolutely no issue. But it has changed. You look at it now, you know, someone pulls a high ball in the air, it's a free, really. Even if you miss the ball by an inch, it's just the way hurling has changed, and it's probably refereed a bit differently. So to be fair, you definitely would have not sympathy with Colm Lyons, but I think I think on the balance of play, he made the right call.
Yeah, I think we have to give a lot of credit to Conor Cooney here, because this is the first season that Joe Canning isn't here. I mean, Conor Cooney, I think, took over the frees. Was it 2014 or 2015? I can't remember off the top of my head. But
14, I think, yeah, in Tullamore,
yeah. Yeah, so there was one season that he took them over, and he did fine that year, and, you know, Joe Canning was reinstalled on them. But there's so much pressure over that free. Cooney hadn't scored from play in the game, but he had knocked over 5 frees before that. Missed 1 or 2, but hit a couple of them that were unbelievably impressive. I really like his free taking style. It's very flowing sort of motion. And when he hit it, you knew straight away, this is going straight over. And the roar out of him, that to me said, wow, relief, because it was a huge pressure free. So you would have thought that if Joe Canning was going to be missed this year, it might be in moments like that. So massive credit to Conor Cooney.
Massive credit is right, Shane. And just you were kind of going into the potential effects of them blowing a lead against Wexford and the psychological damage. If it had happened again and they'd only drawn against Kilkenny, it would have felt like a loss. If they had lost the game, you know, it'd be potentially disastrous for their season. Whereas now, all of a sudden, the pressure is nearly off a small bit. And, you know, fair enough, they were hanging on to some extent, but they got the result, and like it doesn't really matter now. Look at the emotion after, probably the relief after. I'd say from, you know, a lot of those elder statesmen, Cotton Mannion was going mad after, Pádraig Mannion going mad. Like they were absolutely loving it. And even for some of the younger fellas there, I think it will, you know, help them an awful lot. It'd be a lot less pressure on. And just something I said to you as well, Shane, I do think it was important. While David Burke maybe was quiet for, you know, long stages, he did come into it towards the end. I do think Shefflin went with that bit of experience a bit more. Like they needed that bit of experience on the pitch yesterday. Even Johnny Cohn, and just been in the right place for the goal and taking that opportunity. I did think in the Wexford game that, I remember you asking me, like, who else has he got to choose or bring in? But there was a lot of inexperience coming in off the bench. Whereas yesterday, you know, Conor Whelan came in, while not hugely impactful, just having him there was big. And I do think, you know, it was a lot of the experienced soldiers that really stood up yesterday. And you have to say, Joseph Cooney's probably in the form of his life. You know, he's brilliant in the league. He's carried that form into Championship now. You know, fair enough, he probably has that bit of regret over that goal chance against Wexford. That probably would have helped him win the game, but he's carried his form on. And then Tom Monaghan, someone who's probably been on the periphery, you know, over the last 4 or 5 years, was just brilliant. The energy he brings to the table is just huge. And yeah, I just think there's an awful lot to take from that for Galway now. And just getting over the line, I think, is huge for them.
Yeah, Colm Mannion scored 2 points, but you wouldn't say that he dictated the game. Obviously, he was dropping into his own half an awful lot, but you feel there's more to come from him. Obviously, Conor Whelan, so much more to come from him. Davy Burke, I mean, a couple of years ago, you were wondering where's his intercounty future going to go. I remember he was taken off at half-time against Limerick in that All-Ireland semi-final, and, you know, if I remember correctly, had 5 balls caught over him in the first half. And I wondered at the start of this game, where's this performance going? But then he really did come through, like you're saying there. So he, like Wally Walsh, is somebody that's showing a bit of a second coming in terms of like having a really good career, then 1 or 2 years where you're wondering, are they tapering down? And maybe now we're ready to go again. I look at this Kilkenny team and I wonder, are there sort of spinal issues to this team? I mean, Richard Hogan is after commenting here saying, could this be the first indication that Cody might bow out? Beaten by his former pupil, there's no guarantee of a round 2 either, lad.
I'd say the opposite. I'd say he could be re-energized from it in many ways, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, and it's great that there's 2 ways of looking at that. Just the reality is that Dublin have won 3 games out of 3. Wexford obviously got just 1 point out of their last 2 games, but you have a feel they're going to probably kick on now and add to that Laois victory whenever they play Westmeath also. They'll be on a decent amount of points. Obviously, Kilkenny started with 2 wins out of 2. It's very, very tight. There's squeaky bum time now coming towards the end
it's
of the
boiling down beautiful. It's going to boil down perfectly, isn't it? It's going to boil down for, everything to play for, everything on the line in that those round 5 games again, which is everything you want. That's what you want. That's the beauty of the round robin system, that the drama can be even heightened because there's so many permutations at the end of it, and it looks like that's going to happen again in those round 5 games. And yeah, there's more games to come before then, but it's a tantalizing prospect, really.
Yeah, and Munster probably won't go down to the wire, which is kind of the shame on the other side of things. But like, if you look at that Kilkenny performance, they did well to obviously come back from 7 points behind at one stage to be level late on, and there's shades of the Cork All-Ireland semi-final last year when they came back from 6 down to level. But really, if you were to go on the overall flow of the game and just how you felt watching it, it felt like they were a bit behind. There was a lot of unusual stuff here. Owen Murphy, we've kind of lauded him so many times as one of the greatest goalies of all time. But he had a couple of errors, including the one that led to that goal in the first half. I wonder, is Paddy Deegan a 6? Got turned over a few times, carrying the ball into traffic, hand passed the ball backwards to... Was it Joseph Cooney for a goal chance? He's a very good player, but I'm just wondering about him at 6. The midfield duo didn't really fire. Pádraig Walsh can obviously play anywhere, but are they getting the best out of him at 11 in a game like that? He was somewhat quiet. And then TJ Reid, I mean, look, he could be carrying an injury. You just wouldn't know. 34 heading for 35, but it was probably the worst performance he's ever given in a Kilkenny jersey, and he was taken off at half-time. And, we've talked about him and how brilliant he is so many times that I think we can call a spade on this one and people not think we have it in for him. We obviously do not, because we talk about him so much. But to me, I wonder, taking him off at halftime, ordinarily with your marquee player, you leave him on the field because ultimately they're going to do something big before the end of the game. But I wonder, was this a case of Brian Cody maybe wasn't overly delighted with how he'd been going, and the first half just confirmed to him, look, I think I've got my answer here. Darren Morrissey caught a ball over him, Dahi Burke caught a ball over him, and maybe he missed 2 unbelievably easy frees, one from 25 yards out and another from maybe 45. Didn't go for a goal in the 21st minute when, normally TJ goes for the jugular in that situation, tapped it over. And I just wondered, did Cody say, do you know what, I've kind of seen enough? But to be fair to TJ, there's always a comeback in him. He's one of the GOATs.
Yeah, the goal chance was funny because I think it was a matter of tapping the ball over for his own confidence, I'd say, or to try and get himself into the game. The potential, if he'd went for goal and it had been saved, and any confidence just kind of drains away from you. And that's talking about like one of the best players of all time. We don't know. There's the caveat of him carrying a knock. He obviously had a groin injury coming into the championship. So maybe it's, a small little setback and Cody's playing the long game and realising that we're going to need him at another stage. I'm not sure, but I saw, a bit of commentary wondering why, TJ wasn't inside the whole time. Why at this stage of his career is he not an inside forward and they're playing high ball down on top of him? I genuinely think, I just don't think that's his role. I do not think that's his role. And as good as he is in the air, horse and high ball into him in that scenario is, I just don't think that plays to Kilkenny's strengths. Look at the All-Ireland semi-final last year where Rob Downey probably cleaned him out in the last while. And, a couple of people saying, why is TJ the one chasing back? Like, TJ operates brilliantly in that space. That's usually what he thrives in. And question marks about why he wasn't inside. He wasn't inside because Owen Cody was going to town inside, and you want low ball going into Owen Cody. So you have 2 players that are probably diametrically opposed nearly at this stage, and even Billy Ryan was doing well enough inside too. So I don't think it's just as easy as saying a player gets a bit older, horse him in full forward and horse ball in top of him. I don't think that's TJ's game personally. If you look back,
it makes the team easy to defend. If this guy is always going to be standing here and maybe he doesn't have the energy of, let's say, Desi Hutchinson to buzz around and occupy 2 people in a way. I'm not saying TJ doesn't occupy 2 people for an awful lot of his career, but I agree with you on that point. It's going to be more of a stationary target when you've got a guy who's 34 heading 35.
Yeah, and the question I'd ask the people to say he should be inside, show me the times he's gone to town inside, in the last 4 or 5 years. I just think he operates way better in space, not necessarily even scoring, but playmaking. And we don't know, I don't actually know if Cody was asked, what was the story with TJ? Would have been a fascinating question if he just said he wasn't doing it and I took him off. But chances are Kilkenny only had about 20 years of benefiting from referee decisions. This is 2019 v Limerick as an example. No sympathy. Asher, listen, the ball is always going to bounce in. Ball is always going to bounce in the other way at some stage. But it'll be fascinating to see whether TJ plays over the coming weeks or what the scenario is there. Whether they're just playing the long game with him and rest him for a couple of weeks and get him back, or whether he was out of form and Cody just pulled him off. But with a player like that, I do agree with you. There's that much credit in the bank that you just would think that they're going to be left on the field. Barring an injury, they're going to be left on the field. They're going to play themselves into the game and they're going to, make amends for a couple of mistakes early in the game.
Yeah, I haven't used the term wax lyrical in a while, but you love to wax lyrical about things at times, and Fintan Burke being able to take sidelines off both sides stands to you.
Shane, when have you seen that before? And have you ever tried to take a sideline off your left-hand side? It's near impossible.
Yeah, only if you're doing like a quick little pull to, give someone 5 yards away possession.
Yeah, a ground stroke and not a chip, because it's very hard to chip off the left-hand side. Whereas like Fintan Burke, if I'm looking down the pitch here and the sideline is on the left-hand side, he can hit it off his strong side, shall we say. And if it's on the other side, he can hit it off the kind of left-hand side. It's amazing skill, really, because it allows him to be able to draw a ball in with the breeze, regardless of what side it is. I don't recall anybody else that was able to hit off both sides as long and as clean and as accurate as he can. And it's a phenomenal thing to have. And particularly with Joe Canning retiring, the best exponent of a line ball in, hurling's history. And now they have this lad who from wing back can horse over line balls, anything from probably 80 yards inwards off either side of the field. It's unbelievable.
I wonder who would be good at taking sidelines on both sides. I feel like Ronan Maher could do it. Anyone else coming to mind?
Ronan Maher is probably one of the few because it's just so natural. I wonder, would he even practice off the other side? Really though. But I'm sure it's just because he's so natural and so risky, he probably would be able to do it. Because he's one of the only ones I can think of. Like, you can't imagine Ozzy hitting it off his left-hand side. It's not something I've ever seen unless he was hitting the ball short, as you say. But yeah, Burke it's a lovely thing to have in your locker for a team, particularly, near the end of a game, if you're struggling and maybe there's congested bodies back inside, that this guy can put over a line ball from anywhere. I remember against Limerick in the league earlier on this year, he put over a couple of crazy ones.
Do you know, I thought it was very strange seeing Cathal Mannion hit a couple of frees from his own half into the corner flag towards the end of the game. Now, there is the caveat that Galway had about 4 different free takers at different stages during the game. Yes, Fintan Burke, Cathal Mannion, Conor Cooney, and there was one other that I can't think of off the top of my head. But late on in the game, rather than going for a score, he puts the ball into the corner flag. And I think both times it ended up with shots from more or less the corner flag inside the 14. One from Conor Whelan, I think. I'm not entirely sure. But Kilkenny went up the other end then and got a goal. But what do you make of that idea of time wasting and trying to take it to the corner flag in a game like hurling, which is, obviously very different to soccer, where doing that probably makes an awful lot more sense? Because if you hit the ball to the corner flag, right, and you end up losing the ball, players are going to get crowded to that corner. And if the ball gets kicked up the field in soccer, everyone has time to actually run back with it, more or less. But in hurling, if 2/3 of the players are now drawn towards it, ball gets struck up there, it could be 2v2 and 50 yards of space.
The difficult one. I remember Joe Canning doing something similar at the end of the 2017 All-Ireland final, just putting the ball into the corner, I think, when he had it in his hand, rather than putting it maybe in around the edge of the square.
Cork should have done it in 2013.
Exactly what I was going to say to you. And they probably would have been All-Ireland champions if they had. But I don't think Cathal Mannion was going to be able to put the ball over just with the breeze. It would have been in around that danger area there. But like, if Kilkenny had won a free even 20 or 30 yards out there, there's a potential for a score just given the breeze involved. So I haven't got to watch the whole game back yet, so I'm looking forward to looking at that aspect, but probably trying to play the percentages. They did get shots away from closer to the goal, albeit they didn't go over the bar. I don't necessarily think it was the wrong play. It was probably the smart play. It probably just didn't work in their favour on this day, but they managed to get away with it as well.
Look, it was brilliant stuff. We could talk about that game plenty more. If they end up facing each other in a Leinster final at Croke Park, Cody v Shefflin 2 is going to be serious stuff. We've got comments flying in here.
Just quickly, Shane, it's just like Cody v Shefflin 2. This time, it's personal.
Even more personal. Mikey asks, can I ask you, lads, do Dublin have a chance in Leinster this year? What do you think? We'll come to Dublin in just a minute there, Mikey. First off, Wexford beat Laois 6-20 to 12 points at O'Moore Park. Now, I watched this game in its entirety, and Laois were actually quite competitive for the first half. They were just 6 points behind at half-time. It was 110 to 7 points. Now, the problem there was that Laois weren't creating anything from play, in the sense that they didn't score from play until the 43rd minute, I think it was, through Ryan Mullaney. And that was a nice point. So that would tell you that no starting forward was able to really kind of impact on the scoreboard. Well, they didn't at all. Now, Chad Dwyer had a wide early on. James Keys had a couple that didn't go over. They're missing key players. Willie Dunphy was back, but Picky Maher wasn't there. They are down players. And then after 50-ish minutes, Fiachra C. Fennell, who'd done a relatively good job on Rory O'Connor. O'Connor was causing bother. So I'm not trying to say that Fiachra C. Fennell had him quietened. There was no such thing as that. Rory O'Connor won a couple of frees, and I think Fiachra was pushing his luck a small bit. And then when Rory O'Connor took off inside the 21 and tried to cut inside Fennell, he sort of put his body out and connected with him. Now, the thing is, if he hadn't been fouling persistently, I don't think a second yellow would have happened. But when it's happening at speed, it looks a bit worse. But I don't think it was that bad. I just think he made sure that Rory O'Connor wasn't getting past him and sort of brought them both down that way. So a little bit harsh in a way, but I don't think Fennell can have too many complaints because of the persistent nature of it. But from then on, Wexford just went for the jugular. They had already been going for goals from the start, and Conor MacDonald was key to that. He scored a great one in the first half. But in the final 20 minutes, they scored 5 goals. Rory O'Connor was involved in most of them. And so I'm not sure what else you say. It was just a very dispiriting day for Laois, and Derry Egan delighted his first championship win and really bolstering that scoring difference. And we know how important that is from 2019.
Just a quick one. How was Lee Chin moving? And did he play the whole game or the vast majority?
He played, off memory, I think he played about an hour of the game. Kieran McAvoy seemed to pick him up for most of it. And Kieran McAvoy had done a great job against Danny Sutcliffe the first day out. And to some degree, he kept Chin somewhat quiet. I would imagine he's feeling his way back to full fitness. He came on in the last couple of games. This was his first start of the year, I think, which is very, very significant. You saw him come on against Waterford in the league final and have to limp off towards the very end of the game. He wasn't amazing, but I think he got one really nice score after about 12 minutes. He was flittered around. He won a couple of balls, knocked over the frees, which we know can be a problem for Wexford when he's not there. So did okay. Rory O'Connor. Now, this was Rory O'Connor in hurler of the year type form. This is Rory O'Connor who's looking for goals at all times. And if Wexford are going to win games, I mean, you and I would probably both say they've got a couple of really good players who could drive you to an All-Ireland. They've got a couple of okay players and maybe one or two that tend to get exposed here and there, without being nasty and naming anybody. But Laois, they're just down players, and try as they might, it was just a damn burst. The score was okay. Then Wexford started pulling away, red card, and it was an annihilation from there.
I remember chatting to Ross King last year, and he's obviously one of the players that's out injured now. But he just says, I remember him saying to me, I don't know what it is, but we just can't seem to get, a run of, consistent kind of luck almost with injuries. Like, you go back through the last 3 or 4 years, the amount of guys that they have been missing for big kind of championship games are really struggling throughout the league, missing marquee players. And it's the same again. And the squad depth is just not there. With Antrim, Westmeath, Laois, Offaly, any of those teams, you just can't afford to be missing 3 or 4 of your better players, and they're really, really badly punished. And I think it's they're playing Galway next week now as well. It doesn't get any easier. And as regards like trying to get some of their guys back fit, it all kind of comes down to that kind of round 5 game against Westmeath when they'll hope to have the vast majority of bodies back on the pitch. And it's a weird one for Cheddar. While you want to be as competitive as you possibly can and you want to get these players back as quick as you can, you don't want to overshoot and have someone come back to be competitive against Wexford, and then all of a sudden they're missing the Westmeath game. So it's a really, really difficult balancing act. Their most important game of the year is their last game. There's no point in saying any different. That's the game that'll be the game whether they survive or not, and their year will be judged on whether they stay up or whether they go down. But just a bit of I don't know if you call it a capitulation or Wexford really sent some blood, but not a good look on the scoreboard. I suppose nothing would be as bad as the beating they got in Hurling Park last year often, which was just a total non-event. At least this was competitive for a while, but lost Fiacre Fennel, and the ass kind of fell over there, didn't it? Then thereafter.
Niall Corcoran, it was just interesting from his point of view and he did it last year too, that he had coached most of these Laois players, and then he ends up in the other dugout wearing the Wexford colours. But also this is something in a slightly different way we saw replicated at Cusack Park, because Peter Kelly had played with Dublin for years. He won a Leinster title with Dublin in 2013, and some of the guys that played that day were still out in the field. The likes of Danny Sutcliffe, Liam Rush, who came on and then had to go back off. Mark Shootout, who came on. We'll come back to Rush in a second. But Peter Kelly is now a selector under Joe Fortune with the Westmeath team. So it's interesting. There's an awful lot of that going on in the Leinster ecosystem there.
Niall Corcoran has had to do that a few times. He did it against Dublin a few weeks ago as well with Wexford too. So there's nearly a local rivalry or a familiar ties game with him most weeks, in fairness.
Yeah, that's true. But just in terms of the game and who played well, Dublin they're not really a team that often hammers teams. We talked about it, how they did do that to Antrim last year, but in general, it's pretty tight against the team, whether they're a top team or whether they're a team that's lower down in the hurling power rankings, as we would look at it. Rian McBride scored 6 points from play. He missed out the first game against Laois this year due to suspension. He's very important. James Madden scored 2 points for Dublin here. And the reason I bring that up is because Joe Fortune, his former club manager, is over Westmeath. So again, it's just back to those sort of familiar ties. And Westmeath pushed this game hard because they were behind. I think they were 6 or 7 behind. Then there was a long ball in, and Niall Mitchell was looking to flick it back in. So Sean Brennan had no choice but to go up and try and bat it. He batted it out. It wasn't controlled by a defender, and then Niall O'Brien got his hand to it and kicked the ball into the back of the net. Niall O'Brien ended up with 1-3. I do think that the likes of Niall Mitchell got a bit of credit here. Caught a ball over Owen O'Donnell at one stage brilliantly and fed the ball to, again, O'Brien, who knocked it over the bar. Killian Doyle got a couple of nice scores.
I got one outrageous one, Shane, from another parish at one stage in the first
The only
half.
thing is the midfield at Cusack Park is tiny. So while he scored it from just outside his own 45, other pitches, and maybe he would have cleared the crossbar anyway.
It's like Ballybuffet, where the midfield line. There's no midfield line actually in Ballybuffet. I think actually it's basically between the 265s, but it is quite tight. But he played well the last day, but the first day out he was brilliant against Kilkenny and brilliant again. You do need a lad like that to carry the fight when you're the underdog, and at least they were able to keep it competitive for large spells again. In fairness to them.
Yeah, they had themselves in a spot to maybe win this game. They levelled the game around the hour mark, but then Dublin scored the last 5 points of the game to pull clear. Another thing worth mentioning is Tommy Doyle was brilliant at fullback, kept Ronan Hayes scoreless from play, and actually sold it up the field to score a great point of his own.
Point, yeah.
Yeah, I think like Fergal Whiteley came on and he got a couple of scores, didn't start. I would imagine Matty Kenny was looking to mix things up a little bit in terms of giving certain players game time and rest than others. But his full forward line starting didn't score from play. So maybe that'll be a little bit of a mark against them, despite putting up 27 points here. And let's see, is there anything else to mention on that? Well, we might as well move on to the next point, which is Clare's brilliant win, 22 points to 220 over Cork. And we're joined now by Derek Lynch of Clare FM to talk about this game. Is that the banner roar I hear, or is that the sound of Shane getting hammered by Clare supporters?
That's what you're hearing in the background there, Shane, is the gentle Atlantic waves on the wild Atlantic way this morning. Even in West Clare, we're all smiling. I'm here in Park now. We're at the home of Marty Morrissey. I just had to, every little bit of bannerness we could muster this morning, we've decided to do it.
Bannerness? Have you come up with a new word, Derek?
Yeah, I think so. Just especially for Shane. Just really especially for Shane. It's been some week, hasn't it?
Well, talk to us about it. Talk to us about the game. Obviously, you're going to sow it into me, and rightly so here, because I was thinking Cork might come out and actually win this game after a fairly terrible second half against Limerick the last day out, a massive fade out. Clare 28, Cork 220. What was the story of the game from where you saw it?
I think the story of the game, Shane, was kind of similar to the Tip game from a Clare point of view, in that they just simply stormed out of the blocks. Like, I think they reached 10 points inside the first 12 or 15 minutes, and from there on in, Cork were chasing shadows. They were all over the place. I mean, the Cork, I don't want to sound like the lads of the Sunday game going on about Cork and how bad they were straight away, but just look at the puckouts, the way the Cork struggled so badly to win their own primary possession, and Clare just worked on everything. Like, one thing that was really noticeable yesterday, from a Clare point of view, there was no such thing as a lost cause. Like, Robin Mounsey chases down, wins a 65 out of nothing. Peter Duggan almost hooks Collins in the goal. You know, there was everything that you want from a team. They were harassing, no matter how far they went ahead, that savage work rate was still there. And then you look at our full back line, which had probably been a line the Cork might have seen that they could have got some joy from. And you see immense performances from Rory Hayes, Conor Cleary and Paul Flanagan. So from out, I mean, that save from Ever Quilligan just before half time, and I suppose Shane Kingston's failure to maybe do what Ian Galvin had done 7 days previously in having that coolness to finish on the rebound, was a massive moment in the game as well, because those 10 minutes before the break, there's no doubt Cork were on top. I think they outscored Clare something like 7 or 8 points to 2 in that period. So if that goal had gone in, it could have put a very different flavour on the game. But, Clare went in with that big lead at the break and ultimately deserved to hold on for that 2-point win.
Yeah, Michael?
Derek, just talk to me about Peter Duggan for a second, and just there's it's, you don't like using the word intensity the whole time, but the level he brings it to, the want to get a hook in, get the ball in, the life he brings to it all. Like, just for a guy that was missing for the intercounty scene for just the guts of 3 years between championship games, like, he just has brought something completely different to the table. It just sets off a work rate around him almost as well. He's a perfect player to set the tone for everything else.
I think the reason is, Michael, something you touched on there. He's been out of the game for so long, and he's now got this kind of renewed vigour for it. I remember I spoke to him after the Tipperary game, and there was a big smile on his face, and he said, look, if you're not smiling on days like this, you're in the wrong game. He said this time last year he was watching Clare over in Perth, and now here he is back involved in a big Munster Championship game. So he's got that hunger back. We know he's got the skill, he's got the physique, he's got the talent, he's got all the things you want, and he's got the work rate. That's something Brian has really instilled in him. Look at the way Shane O'Donnell has been completely revamped, almost from an inside forward role to now between the two 65s. Like that incident yesterday, I think it was in the first half, over in the shadow of Ardani Arena, where he just pirouetted around when it looked as if he was going to lose possession maybe 2 or 3 different times. Like, that was just total class. And it's something that's going throughout the whole team. Like, Kelly's working back. We mentioned Duggan already. Like, Robin Mounsey is a little dynamo inside there. He's been a revelation this year. And, his fortune came because of Shane Meehan's misfortune last week. But everybody that's coming in now is taking their opportunity. And Brian isn't afraid to throw lads in to give them their chance. Like, he springs Dolan McMahon from the bench yesterday. And he was very unlucky with that long high ball that came in for a finish that he didn't get to hurley to it. So everybody wants to give that honest effort in a Brian Lohan team is going to get their chance. And I think the whole, from 1 to 15 and onwards, are doing just that.
Just a quick one, Derek. Something you touched on there, and maybe it's something Brian Lohan and his backroom team don't get enough credit for. Like, the coaching, I would say, that's going on, and the level of detail that's going into matchups. Like, everybody probably thought Peter Duggan's going to go to the edge of the square yesterday. No, they've obviously learned from what Kilkenny did maybe against Rob Downey last year to put a quick man in, like the success Billy Ryan got off him. As you say, Shane O'Donnell been reinvented. David Fitzgerald probably been reinvented again. They probably don't get the credit for, maybe, Brian Lohan is talked of a lot of time, hellfire and brimstone. And yeah, they bring that to it, and his team bring that to it. But there's a level of thought that's going into, like Tony Kelly starting corner forward against Waterford last year. There's been a lot of really, really good tactical moves. And as you say, reinventing players there.
Oh, it certainly has, yeah. And you could see that yesterday, that the way that Kelly and Duggan dovetailed at times as well, in and out of the foot and half forward line as well. So that's something Brian deserves huge credit for, as you mentioned. And I think the move of David Fitzgerald to a more advanced position has been immense as well. Like, he's got huge physique. And if you ever see a couple of his club games playing with Aina Kilnamona, like, he can pot shots from 90 to 100 yards, no problem, when he's on his day. And, like, he got 3 fabulous scores from midfield yesterday. So, like, he's another savage option up there as well. And you're right, like, often teams will see a Brian Lohan team playing, and they might say it's a small bit agricultural when there's so much long ball going in, but there's a level of intricacy to what they're doing as well. Like the win with the Twin Towers yesterday, once the sending off happened, they shoved Duggan and Shanahan inside and then started lumping long ball. Maybe they'll have learned from that the next day that there wasn't anyone inside to win the breaks and all that kind of thing. But that's something they are doing. They're taking learnings from games, and you can really see them being implemented in the next.
Yeah, Patrick Coleman's asking here, Derek, should Clare not be a bit concerned that they only won by 2 in the end when they were so far ahead for a lot of the game?
But I mean, the sending off coloured a lot of that. Like when they played the last 20 with the 14 men. So I mean, there was always going to be a Cork kick, and the goal probably came out somewhat against the run of play. Like I thought Rory Hayes had defended it quite well. We thought the danger was cleared, and in fairness to Connolly, like he had the speed of thought to stick a toe out and get a boot to it when nobody was expecting him to do that, and they got the point after, which was important as well. But Cork were always going to have that purple patch because their championship season was really on the line. That was the real, talking to Cork people coming out yesterday, while they said it's not 100% done yet. You've played 2 games, you have no points, you can only get to 4, so scoring difference is probably going to determine now. So that was always going to be a concern from a Clare point of view, that they were going to have that period where they'd come back. But it was the first half that Clare put up. Like they got, 3-11 last week against Tip in the first half. I think it was 18 points or something like that by half time yesterday. We all talk about the 30-point barrier, and when you're going 2/3 close to it by half time, you've always got a great chance.
Do you know what? I'm thinking about some of the players that have to come back yet. David Reedy being one. Shane Meehan, you mentioned that he was taken out of the team before the first game due to injury. And there's another one as well. Did I mention David Reedy?
Mark Rogers, Aidan McCarthy.
Aidan McCarthy. I mean, and you know what? I want to mention Ryan Taylor as well. He's a player that, we've kind of talked about him a bit over the last couple of years, but all of a sudden, like he's threatening to make himself a household name, Derek.
Yeah, he is, and he's got that little burst of pace, and you wouldn't think it until you're up close to him. He's a big, strong, physical fella as well, and he's got the most unique style of striking the ball, where he gives that little hop when he shortens up the grip. That's very, very hard to get at. Okay, once or twice it can drop short, but you can see it. They're very tidy scores. And he got one really important one in the final quarter yesterday. Just when Cork were starting to threaten that little score that just settled things down, and also, the fact that he's a clubmate of Peter Duggan. You can see a kind of an understanding between the two of them around that middle third area as well at times, where they know each other's runs, they know each other's habits, and that's a real factor. But yeah, Ryan's a class act, and he does sometimes go a little bit underrated, but I think he got maybe 2 or 3 points again from play yesterday. Like, that's not a bad return for a half forward on any day.
Yeah, and given the reaction that I've had personally by the Clare supporters on Twitter yesterday, I do want to congratulate you on winning the All-Ireland, Derek.
No, isn't there always that little dig up under the ribs, But I think, look, maybe Clare people got a little bit excited yesterday. Okay, I think you're part of it, Shane, that they wanted to kind of let you know that we had won. But the other side of it is, like, you go back the last 12 months for Clare hurling, we've had more off the field talk than on the field talk. Let's be straight about it. It's been in a bad place. And then you had a situation yesterday where Brian Lohan goes over to Ardani Reid, clapping the fans. Not quite the Jurgen Klopp fist pumps, but not far off it. And I think that just almost symbolised a kind of a closing of the circle from a Clare perspective, that this time 12 months ago, there was all that stuff in the Sunday papers. The minors were getting beat by 40 points, and you were saying this is in a low ebb. Now you have a situation where Clare have won their 2 away games in the Munster Championship. There's 2 home games to come, the next of them against Limerick in Cusack Park, and then a game against Waterford. So it's just that feel-good factor, I think, or that almost wondering or hoping that maybe are those dark days of spring of last year now behind us, and that there's reason to hope again. I don't think anyone getting carried away. If they are, they're a bit like myself, where they tend to have a disease called exaggeratinitis. But I think it's just a genuine thing of that we've gone through a bad period in the last 12 to 18 months, and now there's a chink of light there that there's real progress being made under Brian.
Yeah, as I'm sure you know, I'm only being tongue in cheek. Anyway, what did you make of the 2 red cards? Ian Galvin getting sent off for what was considered a little dig back from the referee, and then Mark Keane showed, given his marching orders too, for pushing back on John Conlon. Now, he was down holding his throat afterwards. The incident itself, with the one camera angle that we did have, didn't look particularly bad. But what were your thoughts on it?
I thought they were both soft, to be honest, Shane. I think most people would agree with that. But I'm always of the opinion that if you give a referee a reason to make a decision, well, then you're kind of taking your fate out of your own hands. Maybe Ian didn't need to do what he did, but at the same time, he didn't do a whole pile. I'd imagine, the way things are gone, has there been any red card this year in Gaelic games that hasn't been rescinded? Maybe only Donegal when they didn't decide to appeal. So I don't know why referees even bother sending off lads anymore because they're overturned a week later. But I'd imagine both have a good case to get theirs overturned. I think the Conlon one, it was more an awkward contact than anything. John did go down holding his throat. We saw that picture online last night. But I don't think there was any great malice in what happened. It was more of an awkward coming together than anything else. So they were soft, and I think there'd be a good chance of both being overturned.
The two camera angles, Shane, were, a bit inconclusive. It's very hard to see. You'd need to see it from the far end almost to see whether there was a striking action in it. I think, was it Niall O'Leary on the Cork side, that Galvin kind of snigged, and Conlon, they probably didn't cover themselves in glory with how either of them reacted. O'Leary kind of went back into his stomach, and it looked like there was very minimal contact. We don't exactly know with John Conlon, but he did go down, you'd say maybe a tad easy for a big fella, you would say. But we couldn't see exactly what happened. But definitely the Galvin one, I'd be amazed if that's not rescinded. I'd assume they'd be able to get some sort of footage, maybe from the other side, that would show maybe it was minimal contact. But it just shows you, you just cannot. There can't be anything loose. They can't be swinging back. Referees are kind of nearly only looking for it. So you have to be so careful. As Derek said there, the game did turn a lot probably when Ian Galvin went off. So you have to be really, really careful. You just can't afford to be down a player. It's your championship kind of life is on the line. So I think it's a good warning probably for other teams now, just to see that it's okay getting a red card rescinded, but you could suffer in the game where someone is sent off. So probably a word of warning to other teams just to be really, really careful. And as Derek said there, not give the referee an opportunity to send it to the line.
Michael, what did Kieran Kingston say after this? Because the talk of the town had been, there will be a reaction from Cork. I thought there'd be a reaction from Cork. I couldn't believe that they played as poorly as this, but a sort of an unusual reaction from Kingston.
Yeah, no, you'd have to say it was. I'll just read out the quotes and let them speak for themselves. He just said after you get to an All-Ireland final, as we did a year ago, there wasn't any expectation around the group. You lose it, obviously, and you have a good league campaign and you get to another final. I think expectation increases among everyone, and that's understandable. With that comes plaudits when you win and criticism when you lose. We all know that. That comes with the territory, and you, the media, know that because you were writing it or getting people to write it. You know that well. After the Limerick game and all that happened in the 2 weeks since, what was said by different people has affected players as well. People are entitled to their opinions. I thought we showed a bit of nervousness on the back of that, definitely in the first 20 minutes and on the scoreboard. To me, unusual comments. He then goes on to say later that pressure is a privilege. But if you can't take the heat, you probably shouldn't be in the kitchen. And to me, I was the same as you, Shane. I was expecting a reaction. I think that's probably why one of the reasons you tipped probably Cork to win the game. I remember a couple of years ago when Waterford kind of ransacked Cork, in the COVID Championship in that Munster semi-final. I remember John Milan writing in the Independent that Cork were turning into the Man United of the GAA, fans just totally disillusioned. Nobody knows really what's going on. Then you get this big reaction against Dublin where, they beat Dublin well in Thurles, and you're kind of expecting that sort of reaction, and you just didn't get it. And we probably got a reaction maybe not when the game was over, but when maybe they'd nothing to lose maybe. And that kind of timidness and nervousness is just strange to me. And it just shows there's psychological scars from last year's All-Ireland final. There's psychological scars from the league final. There's psychological scars from playing Limerick the last day. They've carried over, and, their season is as good as over now. Like a disastrous season all told. There's no point in saying any different. An absolute disaster. Everybody thought Cork had a lot of potential to work on, particularly with the underage results. And, they're as good as gone now.
Yeah, Derek, what did you make of Cork? I mean, obviously you were there rooting for Clare, and obviously, yeah, I mean, rightly so. But did you find this to be a spiritless Cork? What did you make of them? I mean, I saw the team being named, and there was 3 changes, and obviously players moved around the pitch and all that kind of stuff. But I thought when I saw the team named, that's when I started getting worried, because I was like, is it really that much of a different proposition?
Yeah, and I think that's why Brian would have targeted the first 15, 20 minutes in particular, because of expecting that backlash from Cork. And he referenced himself after that even in those 10 minutes before half-time, when they got the run and possession game going, they caused Clare real problems. Alan Connolly posed a lot of problems, particularly in the corner, and almost created that goal chance, as we mentioned, for Kingston late on. But I couldn't believe the way that they were retreating on the puckouts. I think it was David McInerney's point with maybe 25, 26 minutes gone. He had the ball in about, I'd say, a radius of maybe 10 yards all around him. He could have done anything he wanted with it, and he lashed it over from maybe 90, 80 yards out. So Like, that was just crazy as to why they were doing that. Whatever chance they had, it had to be a mile a minute stuff right the way through. And again, like this thing of looking for the perfect pass, looking for the picture book hurling, that's not the way. That's not going to win you games anymore. I felt all week, and the reason I was confident that Clare were going to win on Sunday was Cork have all the pretty hurlers in the world, but I didn't feel they had them in to match it up. They didn't have a Conor Cleary, they didn't have a John Conlon, a Cathal Malone, a Peter Duggan, and the likes of Aaron Shanahan to come in. I didn't feel there was enough physicality in their team, and maybe there wasn't enough in the legs of Harnedy and Horgan to keep going at that intensity for the 70, 72 minutes that were needed. So for all their underage success, Cork, I think and this is something that maybe the Cork public and Cork hurling in general is going to have to accept, that there's maybe a rebuilding process to be done here that might need to kind of dampen expectations for 3 or 4 years until you bring these guys through and become that force again. But you know the expectations that's down there, you know the tradition that's down there, how readily will that be accepted? I think that's a major question for them to answer.
Isn't that one of the great things that Brian Lohan has done? That a few years ago, when you looked at the Clare team, it was an awful lot of players who were fast, dynamic, and maybe, I'll be a small bit kind of rounding it up here, but like 5'8", and now they're a team full of big physical men. And you look, if you don't have a team that's considered manly or physical, it's very hard for supporters to get behind it in hurling.
Hugely so. We saw that when Galway had their spell of a couple of years in dominating hurling, they had big, strong physical men. Limerick have taken it to a new level. There's nearly a team of WWE hurlers, the way that Limerick have gone at the minute. Like, and come on, Verney with the dirty jersey. But I remember there was a friend of mine that met Ger Lucknan out hunting one day, and he said to him, Ger, wouldn't it be lovely if you had a team of 15 Jamesies? And Lucknan turned around to him and said, you'll win nothing without Holly Baker. And I think that's something that Brian has taken on board now on that, just with what you mentioned there. Like, for years, we had the Podge Collins, Conor McGrath, all these fellas, lovely hurlers, but maybe not as physical as you'd want. Now you've got the brutes in there that can, like, you look at this, was it Cathal Malone put in a savage shoulder yesterday? I just can't remember the Cork player that he buried, but it was a real moment of kind of saying, we're in charge here. Maybe that's something Clare didn't have 3-4 years ago, but as I mentioned, that central spine in particular now, that's a really, really physical thing for Clare to build on.
I think Derek's totally right there, Shane, as well. You talk about the balance to a team. You need the silky lads. You need the, pardon the word, you need a couple of pigs as well. That lads are just going to do the work and just get stuck in. You need that bit of cuteness. You won't win anything with 15 silky hurlers. You need that perfect blend. You need that, the dog of a wing forward that's going to win you high ball and get in around the break. And I think Clare have a nice little balance to it as well. They have loads of silky fast forwards. Then you throw Duggan in the middle of it. You throw David Fitzgerald in the middle of it. John Conlon at the spine of the defence. There's a nice little mix there coming. And as you said, Shane, plenty of good players to come back potentially the longer it goes on.
Yeah, I'm very interested to see if Kieran Kingston remains on. I would imagine that, he's had an opportunity. He's had 2 bites of the cherry. It feels like it's getting further away. I'm not sure he'll be there next year. I see a comment there from the UNC saying Ben O'Connor deserves it. Obviously led Middleton to county glory last year. Maybe that'll be an option. But that'll run and run. Derek, I want to ask you about the Clare footballers as well, because obviously they played in the first ever championship penalty shootout of the week. I have to. So the game finished.
There's always a dig. See,
and there's always you taking offence to nothing. I know. But Limerick 2-16, Clare 1-19 after extra time. It wasn't on TV. I was listening to Clare FM and your boys describing it, and Sil going hoarse as he likes to do when it gets really exciting. It was great stuff listening to it, but it ended up being routine enough for Limerick 4-1 on penalties. Can you talk to us, I suppose, briefly about the game, but then just the whole spectacle of the penalty shootout?
Yeah, just from the game's point of view, I suppose, speaking to Colin Collins after, he just admitted that Clare had enough chances in normal time to win it. I suppose people would have seen the highlights last night. That late goal chance for Gavin Cooney, had that gone in, it probably would have killed the game. Jamie Malone looked like he had kicked the winner and Limerick got down and manufactured a free. I thought Limerick's efficiency was incredible. Someone told me a stat that they took 18 shots at the post in normal time, scored 114. That's incredible shooting. And Clare didn't replicate that, obviously. So, Limerick were coming to Cusack Park as the promoted team. There would be no fear of them coming. If it had been reversed, Clare wouldn't fear going to the Gaelic grounds either. But they just hit the ground running. I thought they were simply outstanding. But Clare would be really disappointed. The goal that came for the Limerick fullback, he ran 90 yards without a glove being touched on him. and like he produced as deft a finish as Messi would. It was a brilliant. I mean, to have the clarity to do that after a 90-yard run when you must be gassed was just a fantastic moment for Limerick and a really, really good goal. Clare fought back well to force the extra time, I felt. And in an extra time, again, like Owen Cleary stands up, 3 outstanding scores from Clay, and you think, right, the storm has been weathered here. And then Limerick go down the field. The one chance they got of a goal in extra time, they took it. They were just so clinical. And in a lot of ways, when the dust settles on it, you'd be kind of glad for Limerick because, number one, Billy Lee is a total gentleman. And number two, they're almost a Clare in a way. I think Limerick have gone on the same journey under Billy that Clare have gone on under Colin Collins. You know, building through promotion. They had their issues a couple of years ago with the county board and all that sort of stuff. And now they're arriving as a real force in Division 2. And I think they'll compete really, really well. As for the spectacle of the penalty shootout, Shane, it was incredible because all the kids, you'd know Cusack Park and Michael, you would as well, down at the Cloister end to the left-hand side of the main stand, all the kids were gathered down there. Referee Conor Lane decided he was going to have the penalty shootout at the other end, and it was as if you caught a snooker table and just tilted all the young lads down. They just took off. They took off, tearing down to get behind the other goal, and it was a savage spectacle. Now I'm kind of betwixt and between as to whether I'm in favour or not of penalty shootouts. It's not because of the result. I'm just thinking in general. We know, look, with the split calendar and the dates are there, you have to have you have to finish it on the day. I don't think replays are an option anymore. I would be more in favour of penalties than free kicks, to be honest. I think free kicks are more of a lottery than a penalty kick. It's cruel, but is there another way around it? It's hard to tell. Like, some people are in favour of go a 5 minute each way, or the next score wins. But do you want the game decided on a dodgy free? At that stage, you know, there can be a normal time, obviously, but it's a question to rumble on, isn't it?
Yeah, and Michael?
The golden score, Shane, is something that you've said fairly regular, and I have to say, I think it's probably a fair way. And as Derek said there, potentially there could be, you know, a ropey free or whatever, but you're hoping that whoever wins will be, you know, winning on merit, really. But I do think when I was looking back at the penalties last night, and I was just kind of thinking, you know, in a way, none of the Clare lads kind of signed up for, you know, the pressure and the spotlight that goes on, you know, God only knows how many people looking last night and you're missing a penalty and maybe, you know, seen by some clowns as the villain of the piece now because you've missed a penalty or that you've let people down, which is absolute rubbish. Whereas I just think something like the golden score, a team has to go and win. I would say you have to go and do something to win the game. And, you know, it's not any one player's individual fault if their team loses, whereas with penalties, it kind of can be. But, yeah, I think that I have to say, I do think the golden score would be a fair way to do it, I have to say.
Yeah. Yeah, well, look, Derek, brilliant having you on this morning. It's been good fun to build up to the game. No doubt it will be for the rest of the season too. So thanks very much for joining us.
Cheers, lads. Thanks for that.
Derek, some dedication as well to go to a GA ground to do this interview this morning. I have to say, like, I doff my imaginary cap to you on a bank holiday Monday. You're up in a stand at, you know, 9:30 just to add the atmosphere to the show. Good man.
Michael, there's a practical reason for that. In my house, we have 4 kids, 4 and under, so I had to find quietness.
Good man.
Brilliant stuff, Derek. Chat to you soon.
Take care.
Okay, brilliant to have him on there. Just a reminder, we are brought to you by orgaretro.com. Use the promo code OurGame and you'll get 15% off. If it's the jerseys that we're wearing here at the moment, any of the ones that you'll see on screen here, it's the place to go. Best retro jerseys on the market. While we're talking about the Ulster Football Championship, we might as well also turn our attention to Tipperary. Now, they were down by, I think it was 1-1 to nothing early on to Waterford. And this is a Waterford team that had pushed them hard in the league for a draw at the start of the year. But Tipperary since then, well, obviously they lost to Leitrim by 8 points in their next game, but since then have been on a very good run. Recovered in this game here, ultimately won 2-13 to 1-8. And now it's a Munster semi-final, Limerick versus Tipperary. And, you know, that would be huge for, I mean, I'm going to look at it from a Tip point of view, but to avoid the Tailteann Cup and get to a Munster final, that would be very big for Tipperary. Although there's more of a chance of winning the Tailteann Cup, I suppose, the other side.
True, yeah, but you probably would have said that a couple of years ago, I suppose. You wouldn't have thought they were going to win Munster in 2020. Just a quick aside, I think for Limerick, the forgotten thing in Tip winning Munster a couple of years ago was, you know, how close Limerick were to potentially being in that position. And Conor Sweeney's, was it a sideline to level it up at normal time, you know? And Limerick would have felt, you know, very aggrieved by that. And, you know, how close maybe it could have been them that created a bit of history. So nice from their perspective to get over the line in a similar type situation the other day. For Clare, just disappointing as well, just from the point of view of they've been so good, particularly since Colin Collins took over, but they've just maybe missed an opportunity or two. I know they came up against Kerry, I think 6 times in Colum's reign in Munster. And then the other times they've been on the opposite side, they probably just haven't taken the opportunity, and they didn't take their opportunities the other night, you'd have to say. But from a Tipperary point of view, yeah, doing what they had to do after a really poor start to Division 4, they've really, really turned the screw now. So, a massive opportunity awaits for either Limerick or Tipperary in that big semi-final. Like that'll be a brilliant game. Again, like the game was on Saturday night. Difficult enough to call a winner, but you'd probably have Limerick as marginal favourites just based on where they are in Division 2 and been probably on the crest of a wave after that result the other night.
Yeah, right off tip at your pearl, that's what I'll say. I'm not sure we'll get around to doing our Hurling Power Rankings today, but we'll do them very soon. A reminder of Thursday's show, that's Patreon only. Richie Power and Kieran Carey there every week. They've been absolutely brilliant so far. So consider signing up for that. It'll only take you about 30 seconds and it's a £5 a month, which works out as very little. By the way, we should mention that Tipperary forward, John McGrath, he's going to miss the rest of the season and probably for Lockmore too after rupturing his Achilles. And a double blow for Lockmore Castleiney is that Ed Connolly, who was playing brilliantly for the under-20s who are in the Munster final this coming Wednesday, he did his cruciate. So that's a double blow to the double county champions. And if I'm to go off on a small tangent for a moment, I wonder what the odds are on Bursley or Killadangan winning the county title this year, because Turles Sarsfields are going to be down Paddy Maher. And I've just mentioned 2 massive losses to Lockmore Castleiney. So just thinking, the odds might sway in the favour of those 2 teams, but obviously there are others that can also come into the conversation.
You managed to wangle Bursley into an inter-county conversation somehow. Fair play to you. But that's a massive disappointment from John's point of view. Just a real killer, because his club form last year, hurling football, was as good as we have ever seen, and you would have liked to see if he got the opportunity to even carry that over into this year's kind of inter-county scene. It's another kind of a sucker punch against Tipperary, another obstacle that they have to try and climb heading into the Limerick game.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on Offaly after the weekend? Joe McDonagh was at round 3 and the result in this game was Offaly 126 down 218. So a nice victory there.
Brilliant result, Shane. Yeah. Not that they always had down at arm's length, but they were always in control somewhat anyway. My own club, my own Cattle, was very good. He 12, I think it was 12 frees and 4 from play, 16 in total. But moving Killian Sampson up to the forward seems to have made a massive difference. He hit 1-5, and I see a lot of the papers using the Sampson headline, as, he doesn't have long hair or anything like that, but he still, he carried Offaly on his shoulders probably the other day, and that's a big result up in Ballycran. No point in saying any different. We have, we've probably got the worst draw of anybody, going to Antrim, going to Ballycran, going to Kerry, but we've put ourselves in a really, really good position now to get through. Just a word on down, obviously a poor result for them at the weekend, but probably the fact that they won the under-20 B on Saturday, beating Roscommon, that's probably the big takeout for them from the weekend. That was a huge result for them. But they're under pressure now. It will take, it'll take a little minor miracle for them to get to the final. It really looks like it's between Antrim, Kerry and Offaly. Antrim beat Carlow 222 to 122. Really good result from Antrim. They're in pole position now. But I have to ask, what's going on with Carlow? Like the inconsistencies with Carlow. They 430 the first day against Meath. Then they hit 15 points at home to Kerry the week after. We're beating 321 to 15. And now they run, the favourites for the championship to a goal. It just, it doesn't make sense. And that some of their league form didn't make sense as well. Really, really inconsistent. Turn it on one day, it's like it's off the next day, and then it's on again the next day. But it's too late for them. They're out of running now. And as I said, it looks like it's down between Offaly, Antrim and Kerry. Kerry had a huge win against Meath. Meath really, really struggling, you'd have to say. Conceded 430 against Carlow, as I said. 222 against Offaly, and were reasonably competitive, and then 625 against Kerry. Just really, really worrying from a Meath point of view. Just 1 point on that. Fionn Mackesy, who was on the Electric Ireland third level hurling and football team this year. He hit 6 points from play from wing back the other day. If Dermot Burns did it, we'd all be waxing lyrical, as you said earlier. So just important to to credit that achievement, like 6 points from play from wing back, no matter who you're playing, is an outstanding achievement. And they put themselves in a really good spot. It's basically coming down really between that game between Offaly and Kerry, down in Kerry, to see who will probably be playing Antrim in the final.
Yeah, and Offaly look like they're getting closer to Antrim if you're to contrast the league relegation playoff versus their match in the Joe McDonagh so far this year. Pat John says, do the rankings, please. If we get time, we might give ourselves 60 seconds at the very end where we have to do it, which is going to be tough, but we'll try and get through it. The Ulster Football Championship was on at the weekend. Now, first off, I thought it was interesting. I can't remember exactly who put up the stat, but games won in the Ulster Championship in the last decade, as in 2012 to now, Donegal have won 28 Ulster Championship games, which is some going. Next up is Monaghan with 16, Tyrone 12, Cavan 9, Down 7, Armagh Fermanagh with 4, Derry with 1, Antrim with 1. And an interesting stat that came out of that also was Michael Murphy has never scored a goal from open play in the Ulster Senior Football Championship. I think he made his debut in 2007 or something like that. So he's on the go an awful long time, but maybe that's to do with the attention he gets. But just to talk about the games at the weekend, Monaghan beat down by 23 points to 2-7. Jack McCarron was brilliant. 23 points from 11 different Monaghan players.
Just on that, Shane, the goalkeeper and the whole full back line scored from play. I can't remember the last time, or all scored. I can't remember the last time that happened in a hurling game, let alone a football game, a championship game. Like, I saw Dick Clerkin tweeting it last night, and I don't remember when that's ever happened before.
Yeah, and you know, it was pretty much one-way traffic for the most of the game, except for a couple of goals for down either side of half-time. Now, fair play to them. They were miles behind and looking like they were going to get battered. And then they got those goals first from Cialan Mooney and then Pat Havern just after the break. Two nice little finishes, and you thought, oh, could be game on here. But, you know, in terms of it being a lifeline, didn't really work out that way. And I think it says a lot about Monaghan now that they can put up 23 points, and Conor McManus is only getting his first from play around the hour mark when maybe the game's already in the bag.
Wasn't that a lovely point as well? He knew he was going to be blocked and just did a little, like a dummy hop almost. It was a beautiful score, just real instinct. But as you say there, that's a really promising sign for them that there's less reliance on him. And listen, that's going to have to be the case over the next couple of years because he's not going to be there forever. So great to see other guys kind of stepping up and the scoring load being spread out, and they can maybe hurt you in several different ways rather than just through Conor McManus now.
Yeah, and I suppose one of the main reasons I put up that stat about the games won in Ulster in the last decade is Derry had only won one game, but Rory Gallagher's after leading them to victory over All-Ireland champions Tyrone, and in fairly emphatic circumstances too, won 18 to 10 points. Brian Kennedy was sent off for Tyrone, but there was an end. Like, if you look at some of the other things from the game, Tyrone scored just 1 point from play. Obviously, there's marks, and sometimes a mark was probably going to be a point anyway, but they're living off scraps, whereas Derry scored 9 points from play and Shane McGuigan tucked away that penalty fairly emphatically. Is this kind of things coming home to roost from Tyrone? I did a piece earlier in the year, I can't remember who, but they suggested that maybe it was a case that Tyrone just came through the middle last year when Dublin were on a down year and maybe just won an All-Ireland against the head. And now we're seeing that, 7 players going away from the panel, this sort of result here. Maybe they're not quite the greatest All-Ireland champion of all time.
I kind of tried to do a bit of digging just on the players leaving, and I could not find, anything sinister, shall we say, in it, or lads falling out, or couldn't find any of that.
But it's probably just lads they don't want to sit on the bench. They've done it long enough, and they're like, you know what? It's this stage of the year. It's pretty clear you're not going to start me or play me. So you know what? I've better things to be doing. After
winning All Ireland, it is still strange. I
don't think so, because they're like, we've gotten to the top of the hill. We want to go again. All right, you're not going to use me. I'm not wasting my time sitting on the bench when, I think that's it.
Yeah, geez, I still find it peculiar, because if it was a losing team or something, you'd say something. But listen, maybe some of those lads thought the writing was on the wall. But just a quick aside, it's funny that, you put up those stats about teams, how many games had been won. Rory Gallagher has played a part in the one of Derry's 2 Ulster wins. Fermanagh's run to the Ulster final a couple of years ago, so he has Fermanagh's the vast majority of the 4 that they've won. He's been involved in, and he's been involved in probably the guts of 10 or 12 of Donegal's 28 wins as well. So you can kind of link him to 3 different counties in there. And in fairness to him, like, Derry were at a pretty low ebb when he took over. They were in Division 4, weren't they, when he took over? Division 4, Division 3, Division 2. If it hadn't been for that disastrous result against Galway in the league, they'd probably be promoted to Division 1. And you have to say, really put Tyrone to the sword in really, really emphatic fashion. This wasn't hanging on by a couple of points or anything like that. This was really emphatic stuff. Shane McGuigan just, in serious, serious form. And you have to say, from a Tyrone point of view, an awful lot of frustration. Like that, that kind of kick from Brian Kennedy. Fair, I don't really know if he connected, but there was intent there. Like just throwing a kick after winning a mark on a kick out, just really, as I was saying to you off air, the same in Dunphy is like a display of petulance. It was really, really, really strange. And then Conor McKenna throwing the ball at one of the Derry lads, just very uncharacteristic stuff that would maybe suggest that, there's a few things that just aren't right within that camp to deliver such a non-performance. Yesterday, I think they turned over the ball something like 18 times. They were turned over. Like for Tyrone, the All-Ireland champions, the masters of possession almost. Like it's treated, it's like having a child in your arms. It's treated with that much care. And to give it away so unnecessarily yesterday, there was one with Ronan McNamee going through. I think he ended up passing the ball to the Derry goalkeeper. Just really, really strange. Just a point as well on is it Oran Clark, the Derry keeper? I think it's Oran Clark. He made a brilliant save. Forget which it was from Conor Myler at one stage, and it was just a point on him as well that he stood up tall. You know the way you see a lot of keepers, Lynch. Sorry, you know the way you see a lot of keepers actually, anticipating the shot and diving to the ground, and the ball nearly goes over them. That happened in some other game at the weekend, and I can't remember. But the importance of a fella standing tall, particularly a keeper, just like he's a big man, just getting in the way. I think a lot of keepers go to ground and are looking for extravagance a lot of the time, and then the lad just kind of kicks the ball up high and it goes over them. But really, really good stuff from Derry. Really, really good stuff, and they've given themselves a really good opportunity of getting to an Ulster final now. And it's not like, as I said there, it was emphatic stuff. They won't lose the run of themselves, and they'll really, really fancy a good shot at Monaghan the next day now.
Yeah, Rory Gallagher, he's obviously been there as a coach who tried to defend an All-Ireland before with Donegal in 2013. He was asked about the difficulty that Tyrone had. He said, I felt they were a small bit vulnerable. It's not easy being All-Ireland champions. I know myself from experience from being involved at Donegal. You think you're doing things right, but sometimes you need a wee kick up the backside. They've got that now. They'll respond. From my point of view, I felt we were getting better. We wanted to play against the better teams, but you have to start beating them. And then on the other side, Brian Dewar said, you hope that you can regroup and get over this and get out of the system. We can dwell on it, but we can dwell on it surely, but there's no point. We have an opportunity where it's not all lost yet. Hopefully we grasp that opportunity. Okay, we'll jump on to the
Just on that, Shane, they have previous in this regard. They were totally written off last year when Kerry absolutely annihilated them in the league, and sure, look at what happened thereafter. Yeah,
Westmeath beat Longford by 313 to 14 points. So that's Jack Cooney's men avenging a league defeat to Longford fairly emphatically. I'm going to jump and just mention the result between Kildare and Laois. That was pretty much one-way traffic in the first half. 222 to 12 points it finished up for Kildare. It was 13 points to 8 when Daniel Flynn won a penalty, which Kevin Feely slotted home. Louth made a decent fist of it for a while, but Kildare cruised on. Dublin were on TV on Saturday evening and beat Wexford 124 to 4 points. Bit of a cakewalk in the first half, 10 points to 1 at half time. I saw us looking at the stats, it was 19 chances to 5, and that just tells you how difficult it was for Wexford to get the ball up the field. 5 of the first 7 scores came from Wexford's long kick out being turned over. Brian Fenton was brilliant. He scored 4 in the first half alone. And I suppose, look, what I did think was interesting, like some of the main points that I took away from the game was Conor Callaghan was obviously back in and he was in good scoring form, obviously knocked in a goal as well. David O'Hanlon starting in goals. That was one that kind of caught me off. Evan Comerford is injured, and it's just interesting that they went that way instead of Michael Shields.
Yeah, interesting. I hadn't really heard much about him until he played that game the other day. And from a Wexford point of view, you would have to question the fact that they just let Dublin have the kickouts and didn't. I know, like, by putting up a high press, you're potentially leaving yourself vulnerable at the far end, but they never asked any questions of a debutant. Never even, they left the odd ball in around the edge of the square, but never pushed up in his kickouts and, really pressed them. He's never had to, find a kick out, find an 80-yard kick out to somebody making a run in championship football before. So I thought that was interesting. I know it might have been seen as risky, but I thought they would have, asked the question at least, and maybe see could they ruffle his feathers a small bit. I think from a Dublin point of view, saw some commentary saying, that at times Dublin had Johnny Cooper back sweeping against the Division 4 team. Why are they doing this? Probably with the view to down the line. I do think Dublin played conventional. They defended quite conventional most of the time. And I thought they were really, really good at getting bodies in around the Wexford attacking players and just denying them even a shot. And they refused to foul lads really as well. They really tried to make Wexford earn it. And what did Wexford end up with? 4 points over the guts of 75 minutes, which is just, a really, really poor return. Quite methodical from Dublin, but an awful lot better way to start than this time last year. They really, really dictated the game from start to finish. You mentioned Brian Fenton there, managed to get into a situation where he was one-on-one with a Wexford player a couple of times and was able to take on the shot nearly the whole time. And he's just a really, really impressive strike rate there. So kind of, I don't know if it's business as usual from Dublin, but a good way to start off their campaign, you'd have to say, and a good way of maybe, banishing the narrative of doubts around Dublin maybe, and after the relegation to Division 2. This is kind of really, really professional stuff. Swatted aside, a team that they would be expected to, and I don't think you can ask for much more than that, to be honest.
Yeah, and you can't underestimate having Conor Callaghan back scoring 1-6. But just another point on David O'Hanlon. He's just the third goalkeeper to play a championship for Dublin in the last 20 years. And the first right footer since before Stephen Cluxton started out. Wexford will be heading for the Tailteann Cup. So too will Wicklow. You watched Meath beat them by 4-13 to 112. And Jack O'Connor scored the fastest goal in championship history after just 9.5 seconds. I'd say at that stage you were thinking, all right, let's fold up the tents and go home, were you?
It was unbelievably quick how it happened. I think Brian Menton tipped the ball down to Ronan Jones. Ronan Jones played a lovely left foot ball over the top. Jack O'Connor had the ball in less time than it took Usain Bolt to run the 100 metres in the fastest time ever. I see a couple of people commenting this morning that Pádraig Doherty's goal was it Dublin in 1992 against Offaly. There's not a time on it, but they're looking at maybe around 8 seconds. But it was the first time I'd ever seen that goal before. So there might be some debate about whether it's the fastest championship goal of all time.
But you were happy to go with it in the headline, you were?
You're dead right, I was, yeah. I couldn't find anything to the contrary. But again, this does smack of, how do we get GA statistics? Where's their centralized way of knowing, okay, remember when David Tubridy became the highest league scorer of all time last year? That was because, a fella had done unbelievable research. Like the GA need to centralize all this. They need to have stats coming out the whole time. All these things will disappear in time. But just on Meath and Wicklow, not particularly impressive from Meath, you'd have to say. I think they put 7 goals past Wicklow the last time they met 2 years ago. Not quite as comprehensive as that, and Wicklow put it up to them at times. But the 4 goals that Wicklow conceded against Laois, a much inferior Laois team the week before, those kind of worries probably came home to roost. James McEntee followed in a kind of a half shot from Brian Menton, kind of palmed the ball into the goals. Who was it? Matthew Costello got a really good goal after coming off the bench, and then Jack Flynn got a lovely goal after a beautiful pass in from Jordan Morris. They definitely didn't light it up, and they're going to have to be an awful lot better against Dublin. That's needless to say. They're going to have to up it a serious amount of gears. But from a Meath point of view, Donald Keoghan back at centre back and really, really good. Conor McGill full back, really, really good full back. Menton driving the forwards from midfield, and they have a couple of forwards. Would say probably in Jordan Morris. Killian O'Sullivan was quiet yesterday, but they have a couple of forwards that can do a bit of damage. But you definitely would be taking a big departure to say that they're gonna rock the Dubs or anything like that. And Andy McAtee said it after. It's probably wishful thinking to think that Dublin have dropped in the pecking order a lot. It remains to be seen, but they'll have to go and prove that the gap is closed. But from looking at Dublin the other night and looking at Meath yesterday, you'd probably say that Leinster is probably only going one way at the moment.
Yeah, so the draw was made on the Sunday game last night for the Leinster semi-final, and it's going to be Kildare against Westmeath and Dublin against Meath. I saw Shane Mangan tweeting the last Leinster football semi-final double-header in Croke Park pre-COVID in 2019. Dublin versus Clare and Meath v Laois was attended by 36,000 people. 2 semi-finals in O'Moore Park / O'Connor Park / Nolan Park could fit up to 49,000, would make for a much better atmosphere. I do think there's a point in that maybe it doesn't necessarily have to be at Croke Park here. And I'm not sure that it will be either, but it's definitely something worth keeping in mind. And in the final game of the weekend that we haven't talked about, the Connacht Senior Football Championship semi-final, Roscommon 23 points, Sligo 11. Early red card for Sligo kind of turned things towards Roscommon, who probably would have won the game anyway if you were to go in terms of where they are in the overall pecking order of things. But Tony McEntee was saying afterwards that he's going to embrace the Tailteann Cup. But as you were saying to me beforehand, you feel like he has no choice but to say something like that, even if that's not how he's actually feeling.
Yeah, you can't wave the white flag now and just say, listen, championship is over or whatever. It's so important, I suppose, that the manager sets the template really of how a squad is going to look at the Tailteann Cup. I was chatting to Alan Costello, the joint manager with Victor yesterday. He said the same. We're going to give it a good shot. We've made a conscious decision that we're going to give it a good rattle. We're looking forward to the draw. There's a bit of intrigue about it. Again, he did, placed a bit of pressure on the GAA to, jazz it up a bit, make it as important as, if you felt it was this necessary to bring in this competition, well then let's promote it properly. But listen, you'd be hoping all the teams involved, there's none of the teams there that think they can't win it. I'd imagine they all think that they'd give it a good shot. So why not treat it as such and give it a good rattle? And it's so important for the manager to set the tone, and the backroom team to set the tone as well. So I think that's kicking off in a couple of weeks. So it will be intriguing. When will that draw take place? Where will it take place? Will it be promoted as much as a qualifier draw will be promoted, or as the Leinster Senior Football semi-final draw was kind of promoted last night? It's very, very important that the GAA do that and big it up as much as possible.
Let's do a very, very quick power rankings. I'm going to give ourselves sort of 3 to 4 minutes to do it here. I'm going to bring it up on screen and we'll just look at what it was the last time that we did one just a couple of months ago. And boy, it's looking a bit ugly here for me. So we had Limerick at number 1, Waterford 2, Cork 3, Dublin 4, Tipperary 5, Wexford 6, Galway 7, Kilkenny 8, Clare 9, Antrim 10, Laois 11. It's Laois 11 and Westmeath 12. Oh God, where do we start out? Right, so we don't have to worry about Limerick changing. They're staying up here at the top, yeah?
Yeah, I don't think we have to worry about Waterford changing either, realistically.
Yeah, okay. Cork, they're going to be careering down the hill here. But let's just go with number 3, first of all. Are we looking at Galway? Are we looking at Clare? Are we looking at Dublin, for example? What do you think?
Probably be either Galway or Clare for me, with Kilkenny not too far behind them. That's what I'd be looking at the moment for third best team in the country. I have to say now, I haven't been blown away by Galway. That was a good result yesterday, but I definitely wasn't blown away by them against Wexford. Clare and Galway is tight. I'd have to say. Now we had Clare at 9. We have to say there was a caveat in it. We thought they had an awful lot of potential. It was just a matter of I think there was doubts about whether Tony Kelly was going to be back at that stage. What are you looking at? Are you looking at Galway or Clare here?
Well, it looks like we're scrabbling for a bit of respectability by talking about why Clare are down at 9. Either way, it's not looking great. I think we'd have to put Clare up at number 3. I do think we have to kind of take our medicine, take our licks on that one.
Just a point on maybe justifying that. They were obviously beaten by Cork by a score last year, a Cork team who got to the All-Ireland final. We had Munster teams as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 at the end of last year's championship. So if Clare are the third team in Munster are going to come out of Munster, as it looks like they will, have we been shown any reasons to suggest that the Munster Championship is not as strong as it was last year? Like as in the top 3 teams, shall we say?
Well, we'll put it this way. They didn't just beat Tipperary and Cork. They dominated long spells of both games.
Yeah.
So we don't know yet what's going to happen against both Limerick and Waterford. But I think we have to give them their dues and say the way they played so far this year, physicality, athleticism, scoring, the fact that they're missing quite a few players, I think we just have to say number 3.
And as well as that, Shane O'Donnell is back since we had them ranked at 9. And there's no doubts about whether he's back at that level. Same with Peter Duggan, same with Tony Kelly. So yeah, I'd happily have Clare at 3. I'd probably have Galway at a marginal 4.
Ahead of Dublin, who've won 3 from two of the games were against the sides that were always going to be in relegation bother.
Okay, you have to look at where you're going to be putting Wexford here.
Yeah.
And I would have Dublin just ahead of Wexford.
Yeah, well, they did beat them, yeah.
But I'd have them still behind Kilkenny.
You'd have Dublin behind Kilkenny?
I would, yeah.
Yeah, well, okay, so...
The problem is with Leinster is Dublin have played obviously Wexford, and they've played, the two of the weaker teams. So have Kilkenny. I would put Kilkenny's league form and, been beaten by Galway by a point ahead of Dublin beating Wexford by a point, shall we say.
Look, the reason that I'd be leaning towards Kilkenny being ahead of Dublin is in Championship, generally, they hold the whip hand over them, and obviously they're back-to-back Leinster champions. So I'd agree with that. I would have Galway ahead of Kilkenny at this point. So it seems like we're leaning towards Galway being at number 4.
Yeah.
So I'd still have Kilkenny ahead of Wexford.
Yeah, I would too, yeah.
But I think Dublin have to be ahead of this would be the order I'd go with. I'd go with Galway, Kilkenny, Dublin, Wexford.
Tipperary, we're 7 counties and they're not even in the reckoning yet.
Hey, look, I mean, I've had to take a nice few doses of humble pie in the last few days. I don't want to eat much more, so I'm just going to put them down the pecking order here. Hey, and no one would be happier if Tip proved everyone wrong and won their final 2 games of Munster, but, let's be realistic.
Who will, are Tip ahead of Cork? I think so. Oh, do you?
Yeah, don't do me like that. Don't do me dirty here live.
Well, I'll put it this way, right? I know they were well beaten in the league final, but Cork did get to a league final. They were beaten by Limerick. What did Limerick beat them by? Was it 8 or 9 in the wind-up? Cork. And based on form, Clare beat Tipperary well. Clare, you could say beat Cork well, but it was only 2 points on the scoreboard.
Cork gave 2 fairly gutless displays so far. I mean, that's what everyone's saying about them. Tipperary were poor against Clare, but gave Waterford a very, very good game. So I think from that point alone, you got to put Tip a little bit higher.
I think it's peculiar how you said Cork had 2 gutless displays, and you just said Tipperary were very poor against Cork.
I'm thinking of muting your mic.
I'd say you probably should have used the same word potentially that you used for Cork in Tipperary's case there, but I can understand why you were reluctant not to. I'd be still having Cork ahead of Tipperary, to be honest with you.
Okay, I'm not having that, and I'm going to put Tip ahead of Cork anyway.
I can't. Like, Tipperary showed nothing in the league, absolutely nothing in the league. Fair enough, they were beaten 4 points by Waterford. They were handed their ass on their home patch in a championship game.
Okay, fine. Do you know what? You deal with the slings and arrows. Actually, we won't get any.
Listen, you don't need to talk anymore. You don't need to talk about any more about that. I'm kind of happy with that. Antrim, see, it's a funny one. Antrim are in the McDonagh and operating in the McDonagh. They obviously they held their Division 1 status. Laois and Westmeath are both operating in the Liam McCarthy.
But Laois relegated Antrim in the 2 different competitions last year. So I think from that point of view, Laois have to be the top of the 3 of these teams.
That's I was going to say I'd nearly have them the bottom of the 3.
Laois.
Well, at the moment, Shane, like they were beaten well. They were good against Dublin. They were competitive against Dublin. Like, they were well beaten against Kilkenny. Shipped a huge score. What was it? 234. Shipped 5 goals in the last 20 minutes the other day. And the way I look at it is, where's the potential for a turning around? Can you see it turning around over the next 2 games?
Well, if they get a few more players back, like they got Willie Dunphy back, if they can get 1 or 2 more back, I think there's a chance. Westmeath, yes, they were decent against Dublin, but they were fairly hockeyed in their other games. And I know
they were decent against Kilkenny as well. Now, to be fair,
but was it 337 or something like that? They conceded
336, 336, yeah.
Well, look, just by virtue of the fact that they've kind of stayed in Leinster the last couple of years, I think until they get knocked down by one of these teams, we have to give them the respect, show them the due respect here, and keep them top. They relegated Laois last year, or Antrim last year. Yeah,
it's funny. We're projecting here, obviously. So I'd look at Richard Hogan says Antrim ahead of Tip Cork. Come on, Richard. Sew it in when you get a chance. I'm kind of looking at projecting at where it will be at the end of the year. I think Antrim will win the McDonagh, and at the moment, I think Laois will be relegated.
Well, look, you had your way with the Cork tip one. I'm going to have my way with this one.
Oh.
Yeah, and like Westmeath's performances have been pretty strong. And then I think, is that not fair enough?
Oh, I think we're being harsh on Antrim there, I have to say.
But sure, they got relegated. They've only themselves to blame.
They got relegated, but they've won their 3 McDonagh games. They've, 1 foot in the final. They're one win away from being back up in Lee McCarthy, whereas one of Laois or Westmeath are not going to be in Lee McCarthy next year.
Yeah, but we're talking about where's the ranking right now, and right now Antrim aren't even in the top 2.
And there's a bit of projection. There's a bit of projection.
Well, what have you done for me lately?
Anyway. I think Antrim have been very harshly done by there. Tipperary have not been harshly done by.
You're just always looking to play both sides. So look,
no, I'm not, Shane. I'm actually not. I have good time for Laois, but I potentially think Laois are the bottom of the pile of those 3. And I agree with SSRI there. I think morale is very, very low in Laois. The middle ground is like Laois 11, and maybe but you won't put Antrim at 10, which I can kind of understand. But I think it's very harsh. I'd have Antrim ahead of Westmeath.
Yeah, I'm not.
I just, there has to be a bit of jiggery pokey there with this. I know we're fighting over the third to last or second to last or last spot, but I don't know. Based on league form and even on the McDonagh Cup form, I'd have Antrim ahead of one of them.
And would you have Offaly ahead of any of them?
No,
in case people are wondering why it's 12, we started off basing it on the amount of teams that were in the top tier in the league, so we're going to keep it at 12.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't have Offaly in the top 12 at the moment, to be honest with you, and I wouldn't have Kerry ahead of. Not going to have Kerry ahead of Laois and Westmeath. No, I'd have Antrim at 11 or 10.
Okay, well, look, we're going to stick with that anyway. So,
are we? Yeah, we're sticking with that. Are we? You've made an executive decision.
Well, you made a decision on Tipperary. You've insulted Tipperary. Every Tipperary person I know is hugely insulted by what you're after saying there. But we're going to go with it anyway, and we'll take. Look, I've had a rough couple of weeks here, so will you give me that?
They're going to get a bit rougher, I'd say, yes.
Yeah. Okay, look, that's the end of the show. Brought to you again by orgaretro.com. Use the promo code OurGame and you'll get 15% off. Thank you very much, Michael. We'll chat to you again soon.
Cheers, Shane.